Hey, what's happening, everybody? This is Eric Addy with Dial into Retirement as well as Retire Early 365. Today, I want to talk a little bit about my upcoming podcast and give you a kind of a sample of some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about. The podcast is going to be called Personal Finance Unfiltered, and my goal is to educate you as well as to point out a few things that you may or may not be aware of, and just something to kind of take note of. So today we are on a website called Violation Tracker. And my first segment with the podcast, which will be out in a few weeks, is on the banking industry. So we're going to kind of go through a bunch of industries in the personal finance areas and kind of point out some things that you should be aware of. And so this is a website called Violation Tracker, and it talks about the different penalties and violations that certain banks have done over the last, uh, since 2000. Year 2000, there's been 305 billion 105,263,779 thousand in violations, fines that the banking industry has come about in the last 19 years. So it's a pretty interesting website. So as you can see that certain companies like Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs has I should have brought my reading glasses. 34 violations. Now these violations could be let's just click on it and see for Goldman Sachs. These violations can be anywhere from toxic security abuses to investor protection violations to mortgage abuses, securities, foreign exchange market manipulation, banking violation, financial institution supervision failures, illicit political contributions, and data submission deficiencies. So they could really get fined or penalized in a multiple different ways. And if you look at here, the most active number of violations is under investor protection violation. The total fines, though, if you look, is toxic security abuses. And if you look at, they've got $8 billion worth of fines over the years for toxic security abuses. Now, this is probably not just one person or one entity suing them and then being penalized. This is probably a number of violations under one record. So it says number of record 5, but it could be 10,000 people in a class action that's coming after them, and the penalty ended up being that amount. So it's just not, when you see a number of records, it's just not maybe just one person or one entity. This could be a lot of people getting on Goldman Sachs. Deutsche Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, UBS. Now, you'd probably figure that Wells Fargo would be the number one because Wells Fargo over the last several years has been the poster child of what's going on or what's going wrong with banking. So if you look at Wells Fargo, mortgage abuses, they have 7 of those, toxic securities, banking violation. They have 15 banking violations. They have 18 investor protection violations. They have 25 wage and hour violations. They have 3 anti-money laundering deficiencies, consumer protection violations. They have 8. So the number of penalties and fines that they've gotten over the years is just pretty staggering. I mean, really, if you look at Wells Fargo, they have had their mortgage division under fire. They've had their investment division under fire. They've had their retail banking under fire. And when we talk about these banks, it's not um, the local banker. It's not going to be the local branch manager or even the regional person. All this stuff generally starts at the top and just kind of flows downhill. So most of these abuses you're going to see started somewhere in upper middle management to way up management that created this kind of toxic environment, let's say. So for a lot of people, you would have thought, and I would have thought as well, that Wells Fargo would have been the top dog when it came to fines. They've just been more of the recent kind of dog you kick in the banking industry as far as fines and problems. You got Citigroup, which is number 3. You got JP Morgan Chase, which is number 2, and Bank of America, number 1. Based out of North Carolina, my home state. They've had $82 billion worth of penalties since 2000. So let's see what they were into. Mortgage abuses seems to be the thing that has gotten most of these banks. There's 18 records or instances of penalties. You've got toxic security abuses, 10. Investor protection violation is 35. That's $12 billion worth of fines. Banking violation, consumer protection violations, wage and hour violations, benefit administrator violation. I mean, it's across the board. It's mortgages, it's the retail banking side, it's the investment side, it's even their employees when they talk about wage and hour violation. That's some sort of, I would assume, something that employees have brought against Bank of America. So that's a lot of abuses. I mean, when you look at the top 10, you got all the big names out there, and all of them have screwed up multiple times. And it's one thing to, get a slap on the wrist, 1 or 2 or 3 violations. Maybe it takes you a little time to clean up, and maybe one of the violations has kind of created maybe 2 or 3 fines. Just took you some time to get it fixed, let's just say. But when you start seeing, this has happened 18 times and 20 times and 25 times and 35 times, I mean, that's just ridiculous. Again, it's almost like these larger banks have kind of carte blanche of doing what they want when they want. So if we scroll down, if you look at the biggest penalty that anybody has suffered, that is Bank of America back in 2014 for mortgage abuses. That was by the Department of Justice for $16 billion. JP Morgan, toxic security abuses, 2013, $13 billion fine. Again, some of this stuff is just ridiculous. And you'd think you would see more of these in 2008. So you see UBS got hit in 2008. Let's see who else. Countrywide Home Loans. Oh yeah, that was a big one. That was owned by Bank of America. They were 2008 mortgage abuses. Citigroup back in 2008. That was investor protection violation. So you would think more and more of these are. And there's a bundle right here of investor protection violations in 2008. But again, some of these are relatively recent. Let's find Royal Bank of Scotland, 2018, toxic security abuses. Now, toxic securities is what got us into a lot of problems in 2008. So as you can see, even in 2014, Goldman Sachs had toxic security abuses. Toxic security abuses in 2016, Morgan Stanley. I mean, again, you would think a lot of these financial firms would have learned their lesson from 2008 on the toxic securities, but obviously it still is happening. They're still getting fined over it. With a lot of these banks and financial firms, if they're getting fined $1 billion, $2 billion, $5 billion, I mean, that's just a drop in the bucket to a lot of these firms and how much they're making. But the problem is that they're still not learning their lessons. So we're going to talk about that more on the podcast and things of like this. We're going to go into the investment industry. We're going to go into the insurance industry. We're going to go into the to the credit industry. And so we're going to pick apart all these different industries and educate you on things that you should be aware of and what's still going on and what's happening and hopefully get you a higher level of information there. So anyway, with the banking, that's something I'm a little bit more closer to because I worked for a bank for 15 years. Now, granted, I was on the investment side of the bank as well as I kind of ran a small bank's wealth department for him for a few years. But what it allowed me to do is to sit in meetings, and I was able to hear about profitability, and I was able to learn more and more about non-interest income and these things that are important for banks these days. So it's something that we can talk a little bit deeper in. Anyway, I look forward to getting the information out to you. Live free, my friends.